Hello everybody and welcome to this month's Specifying Practice Group. As with all of our calls, before we get started we do have a few housekeeping issues. Reminder to everybody, you're currently in listen only mode. That means that we have you muted in order to prevent the amount of background noise that may be distracting to the other listeners as well as the speakers for today. However, at any point in the conversation you'd like to get engaged into the conversation, feel free to do so in a couple of different ways. One of them by clicking the raise your hand button, which should look like a small circle hand cartoon icon on your GoToWebinar panel. Doing so will let me know that you may have a question you want to ask directly to the audience, and I'll send you a chat message to unmute your line, and we can go from there. Additionally, if you feel like just typing in as we go, feel free to add your questions and comments directly to the question and answer box that should be on your screen as well. And Dave Lewis, myself, and today's guest speaker will look at those questions as we go along and interject those answers as we make it work. Lastly, if you are on Twitter, feel free to use the hashtag CSISPG, and we will try to follow along with that and interject that as we go as well. Lastly, reminder that the calls today are recorded and will be put on the YouTube channel. For those of you that may be looking for last month's session, it is still going to be posted. YouTube recently changed their system to allow for a subscription service, YouTube Red, which has prevented us to upload things while the agreement is signed for the terms and conditions. That has been done and handled, so we're just waiting for permission to re-upload some more videos. So look for last month's video as well as this month's video probably by the end of this week or early next. With that, I do want to hand it over to Dave and Lewis to introduce today's topic as well as our guest speaker today, and we can get going with the session. So Dave and Lewis, over to you.
Thank you, Matt. This is Dave coming to you from southern New Jersey, and I got to tell you that today's session is entirely Lewis's doing. So I am along for the ride only because I was not supposed to even be on the call. So I'll be the designated heckler as we go forward, and I'll help all of you with your questions and make sure that we're directing everything back to Lewis and his guests. So, Lewis?
All right. Well, Kent and I are in one of the conference rooms here in my office in downtown Nashville. Kent is a member of CSI and is a CCPR. He is a member of the certification committee and is active in both our local chapter and at the national level. And he is a product representative for PPG paints and for their glass as well. And we appreciate Kent coming to help us out with this. We're in one room and we may have a little bit of an echo issue. If it gets really bad, one of us will pick up and go to a different room. But we like the idea of being able to see one another. So we wish everybody a happy Guy Fawkes Day. And if you're seeing the opening screen here, if you enjoy messing around with paint, raise your hand. Like my granddaughter Gwyneth.
Okay, Lewis, we're getting quite a few comments about the echo, so we're going to have to do something. While we're trying to correct the technical difficulties on Lewis's end, we'll try to let you know that this presentation, we're not going to dive extremely deeply into paints and coatings. We only have an hour to do so, but Kent, because of his experience in the whole field, hopefully he'll be able to answer whatever questions that you do have and be able to point us in the right direction so that we can comfortably specify and actually use specifications for paint systems.
Okay.
So Lewis, are you back with us?
Check, check, check.
That is better. Thank you.
Okay. I just had to go outside the room. We probably should have just used rather than using headsets, we probably should have used one microphone and some. Anyway, so here we are. Let's go ahead and do the first poll question. Recently on LinkedIn, if you would put that up, Matt. Recently on LinkedIn, there was a discussion there's a specifiers group on LinkedIn, and there was a discussion about what sections did specifiers really hate to write, and paint obviously was one of the leading headaches for that. So we're going to do that.
I was wondering how these were going to be received, because it looks like 4 of the 5 choices are all pretty negative. And hey, Kent, where do you fall in this list?
Well,
I hope it's complete confidence.
It is confidence, but then I've been around the paint business for almost 36 years. So, you know, if nothing else, maybe I've learned a few things by osmosis, if nothing else. But I tend to think that some of these other comments could very well play the case here. I see where frustration has a pretty good amount of folks voting for that one, and that's understandable, because with paint, there really, in a lot of situations, there's more than one right answer. It's not just that there's one right answer, but there's multiple different things that could be the right answer depending upon what you want to achieve. So some of the things we're talking about today, if you hear me use the term "it depends," that is probably going to be a common term, because it really does depend upon what is important to you about the paint system. Is the maintenance important? Is the long-term durability important? What exactly is the function here that meets the importance factor for your project? And as we talk about these kind of things, that's going to be the reason why cutting and pasting paint specification is not probably the best practice for your office. Not that anybody does that, I realize that, but I just would want to point out there that each project has its own merits and probably needs to be taken a look at on an individual basis, instead of, well, it's working last project, so we'll work on this project type of thought pattern.
Well, I would like
that was
to
more of an answer than you wanted.
Well, that's okay, because I would hope at the end of the session maybe we take some of these folks from the first 4 answers and move them into the final, into more of a confident position. And it's somewhat surprising, I thought, and I was the one that added ignorance as a choice, and didn't think that we would get any brave souls to actually select that. But it's the leader.
Well, and that's kind of understandable. I mean, I think everybody knows about paint, and they know some of the basics about paint, things of that nature, from maybe working around their own homes or doing work, paint work along the way. But there is a wealth of different substrates, products, systems, things that can be used depending upon, again, what you want to achieve. So I can understand where ignorance might be a thought pattern there, but it's something that we would very much like to try to maybe scale that back a little bit for folks and put it more in the confidence column before we're finished today.
All right, so Matt, let's move on to the presentation then.
Oh.
So we still have the poll showing. Okay.
Oh, okay. That is a situation with paint that is different from other things, is that probably everybody on the call today has done some painting. How many of us have cast concrete or finished concrete? How many of us have done roofing? How many of us have installed storefront or curtain wall, or even household residential windows? Is quite a lot less than most of us have at least messed around with paint. So what does paint do? We want it obviously to protect things. The picture on the left is an outdoor stair, a typical breezeway stair. It's in a dormitory at at an art college here in Nashville, and you can see that the paint has failed, and so we're getting serious rust that's going to take quite a lot of work to change, to remediate. And then on the other hand, this is a building that was built before the First World War, so it's well over 100 years old. And although the colors are a little on the muted side, they complement the cast metal and make a delightful addition to the entry lobby for this historic building. So our two things that we're looking for is protection and delight. Let's see. Oops. There we go. All right. So, and speaking of delight, this photo is the rotunda at the Cincinnati's historic Union Terminal building, and I worked for the firm that did the renovation of that a little over 20 years ago. And you can see that the beautiful polychrome painting on this plaster ceiling greatly enhances the space, and it makes it just a delightful and uplifting experience. So our first subject is what are paints and coatings made of? And Kent, you want to tell us a little bit about this?
Okay, well, let's start off, and as you can see here, we have pigment, binder, vehicle, and wetting agents, or a broader term would be additives for paint products. And if you think about paint, we always refer to the paint by the binder type. Whether we're talking about latex paint or oil-based paint, or we're talking about alkyd paints or acrylic paints or whatever, we tend to classify them by the binder type. And the binder is the glue that holds the material to the surface. The pigment is the material that goes into the binder to help to add structural strength and color and give you the aesthetic value of the paint product. And then the vehicle is the product that carries, is the part of the paint that carries it from the bucket to the surface and then evaporates off into the atmosphere. The vehicle aspect of it, or the solvent aspect of it, is where I guess the paint industry gets into a little bit of a rap with VOCs, with volatile organic compounds. And one thing to say about paints today in comparison to past years is the fact that paint is better today, it has more long-lasting value to it today, and it is safer today than anything we've ever had on the market in past years. We have moved from oil-based paint being the standard of quality to water-based paints being the standard of quality in this day and age. And then last but not least is additives. Additives can add upwards of about 25% to the cost of paint, that only makes up about 5% of the volume of the paint. Having said that, though, those additives add a lot of value to a paint product. We have wetting agents here as one of the examples, and flow agents would be another one, and rheology modifiers. There's a wealth of different additives we put into paints. But whenever you're painting, if you think about from painting at home and so on, whenever you're using paint to put on trim work, as an example, would you agree with me that you like to have a nice creamy, level, nice flow feel to that paint product? When you brush through it, you like for the paintbrush to kind of flow through it and leave minimal brush marks and build the film well in a one-coat application. And then that's what these additives can help to bring to the plate. Now, more expensive paints will have more additives to them than less expensive paints will. The reason for that is, again, you get the value additive of those additives in the product, and with that, you get the better flow rates, you get the better square footage coverage, and things of that nature. Now, if we will go over to the left-hand side of the screen and just think for one moment about binder and pigment, that is what is considered the volume solids of a paint product, is the binder and the pigment. And the volume solids is a lot of times classified as being a real indicator of quality of paint. I would like to kind of have a brief conversation about volume solids, because we can put extender pigments and lower quality binders together and make a really high volume solids product, but it wouldn't be all that great a product. Or we can put a better quality binder and better quality pigments and have a lower volume solids and have a much superior paint. So whenever you're looking at that volume solids number on a data page, don't take that as being the higher the number, the better the quality of the paint. There are some mitigating circumstances that go along with that to be able to make that a qualifier for quality.
Hey, Kent, we have one question. I think I would like to get this one in. This is from Dr. Siddiqui. He says, what's the opinion about applying polysilicate for external and internal metal surfaces near seashore area buildings with harsh climates, as this is my personal invention towards paint? So we have apparently a paint researcher and inventor on the line with us today. And I'm not familiar with polysilicate.
I'm going to have to claim a little ignorance on that myself, because quite honestly, I don't know that I know much about polysilicate from itself.
He may be abbreviating polysiloxane, which we are going to talk about later in the show.
Now, if that's the case, polysiloxane is a different matter altogether. That we can talk about. Can we get some clarification from the about that question?
Sure. So, Dr. Siddiqui, if you could follow up your question, and perhaps if you have a headset or you have dialed in, if you'd like to join in the conversation, we'd love to have you.
In the meantime, let's talk just a little bit about pigment. That pigment in
yes. Let's classify. Let's classify pigments as there's really 3 or 4 different types of pigments. We have prime pigments, we have, I guess for lack of better terms, filler pigments, and then we also have rust-inhibited pigments, and then we also have ceramic pigments. There are 4 basic classifications of pigments, and that's by no means the entire scope of pigments that can go into paint. But to qualify between filler pigments and prime pigments, that would be the one thing that's a classic in paints, is prime pigments hide in the wet state as well as the dry state. In other words, it gives you good hiding power while the paint is still wet. Now, extender pigments or filler pigments, they tend to get, they're transparent in their wet state, but they gain their opacity whenever they dry. Now, if you think about quality of paints, if you've ever used a paint product that you really weren't getting really great hiding power with, and you had to roll it quite a bit, but whenever it began to dry, you began to see that opacity, you probably had something that had a lot of extender pigments in it. Now, normally, we need a good mix of extender pigments and prime pigments to make a decent paint product, because those extender pigments are helpful in terms of the structural strength of the paint product, but those prime pigments are extremely helpful in terms of the coverage that we can get out of a gallon of paint and the ability to hide as we go. And I think most of us would agree, whenever we're painting, we probably paint to hide and then move on down the wall to the next section, and so on. And we need that hiding power in the paint in the wet state. But the prime pigments are more expensive pigments than what the filler pigments are. And again, if you're looking to build a price point in paint, then a lower quality binder and a lower quality pigment would be one way of doing that.
Okay, we had a question, Kent, from Travis asking if you could explain what are volume solids.
Okay, volume solids are the 2 portions of the paint, the binder and the pigment, that are left on the surface after the vehicle disappears or after it evaporates off the surface. So let's take an example. Let's say that we have a paint that has a 50% volume solids. Okay, if we have a paint at 50% volume solids and we put it on at 4 mils wet, then we will achieve 2 mils of dry film thickness out of that volume solids. So we can kind of qualify the coverage value of the paint product out of the volume solids. But by definition, binder and pigment equals what are the volume solids of the paint product. So does that answer the question, or shall we go into more detail?
No, I believe that would probably satisfy. And Travis says yes, thank you. Okay. We had another one asking about where do fillers fit in the 4 that we have on the screen.
Well, and again, they fill in with the filler pigment, that is one of the classifications of pigments. I didn't get into any great detail about rust-inhibited pigments or ceramic pigments, but we could talk about those if you'd like. But the filler pigment is really, talc would be one of those things, silicas would be another one, that they tend to add volume and bulk to the paint product, but they again, they're somewhat transparent in the wet state, but they gain their opacity in the dry state. It's important to have filler pigments in paint products. It's not a matter that having a high quality binder and prime pigment is the best kind of paint. You need some filler pigments in there, again, to add some structural strength to the paint and some scrub resistance and so on to the product. So there is value in having filler pigments in a paint product. The only thing I would say, again, whenever it comes to volume solids, a high volume solids product is not always a great indicator of a high quality paint.
Okay. We have a couple more there, a couple more questions, but maybe we can deal with those in a bit.
One of the things we might think about on pigment, varnish is a form of paint that has little or no pigment in it. And one of the things that pigment does is it protects the substrate from UV. And that's why varnishes don't usually last quite as long as an opaque paint does on wood, in an exterior application.
Well, into wood finishes is kind of a separate subject to a certain degree. A lot of ramifications are similar, but again, as you mentioned, Louis, the pigmentation aspect of varnishes and so on is extremely limited.
And one of the things that designers need to keep in mind is that not all pigments are alike in terms of either their cost or their light fastness. Is that the deeper colors, and especially reds and deep blues, are not only going to be more costly, but they may have more issues with fading in the long run. But
yeah, that really can be, that can play into it. I mean, we could do a whole conversation on color and some of the aspects in terms of the way that we tint paint products and things of that nature too. But suffice it to say that reds, yellows, and oranges, things of that nature that have synthetic pigments in them and so on are sometimes difficult to get really good color longevity out of. It is, and some of it's dependent too upon factory grind versus tinting the material, because we all use tinting systems to tint products to get the full range of colors that we have available in our tint lines or in our color lines. But sometimes we can get better value in terms of color retention for you from a ground-in pigment than we can from adding it post manufacturer in the store and so on.
All I know is when I'm buying watercolor paints, I pay a whole lot more for a tube of cadmium red or cobalt blue than I do for one of the earth colors like raw umber. Let's talk about some of the most common binders. As you say, oil used to be the most common one, and then alkyds were developed back in the late 19th century. But let's talk about the different ones that are available and where we might want to use some of them and where some of the limitations are. I know, for example, that epoxy binders are very good, they're very strong, but they can chalk and even fade when they're exposed on the exterior of a building.
Yes. And then there is and that's here again, that's one of the it depends when it comes to paint systems, because there are multiple different kind of resin types can do different kind of jobs. Some can do them better than others, and that really, again, coming back to what we really want to accomplish by putting together a paint system or putting together a specification for a project. So let's start out and talk about the oil-based, if you will, systems or alkyd products. Alkyd products are a very hard finish. They're good in a lot of circumstances where you need good abrasion resistance. The only issue with an alkyd product is they have a tendency to yellow with age, and they will, over a period of time, chalk and exterior exposure also. So that's one of the reasons why in most situations, and I'm not going to blanket classify anything today because there's reasons to use alkyds in exterior environments, but my preference for most exterior exposures are either acrylic products or urethanes or polysiloxanes or some other issues than alkyds, because again, alkyds can chalk an exterior environment And that chalk in and of itself will create an environment for mildew to grow on that. And as such, you don't tend to get that kind of thing with an acrylic. Acrylic paints have very good color retention and very good fade resistance exteriorly. They hold their gloss extremely well. And they also will go over a wealth of surfaces. You can put them on masonry, wood, and direct metal acrylics can go on metal and so on. So there's a wealth of different places that we can put acrylic products. And again, with that good color and gloss retention and exterior exposure, that's one of my personal favorite systems for exterior usage. Now, if we want to get into a coating situation, yeah, I'm sorry.
Is there a difference between acrylic and latex paints?
Actually, latex is kind of the overall terminology for most water-based paints. Now, there are subclassifications. 100% acrylic is one category, vinyl acrylic or PVA acrylic, there's multiple different classifications. So whenever we say latex paint, we are basically talking about an entire family. And then when we start talking about specifics, such as 100% acrylic or vinyl acrylic or things of that nature, then we're getting into more specific resin types. So the same way as we would say oil-based paints, we could be talking about an alkyd product, we could be talking about a linseed oil-based product. There's multiple different oil products that we could be talking about. But whenever we get specific into the gender of things, then the acrylics and vinyl acrylics and so on would be the more direct resin type to speak to.
Okay. Well, we had a question about, since the material and type of the binder and the type of pigments is from Eric Ledbetter really impact the quality level, how do we as designers, as specifiers, key on and vet or evaluate the quality of pigments and binders?
Well, and there again, that's where I would highly suggest that you have or develop a relationship with a paint professional in your area. They can help guide you through those kind of things. If you take a look at a paint binder in the past many different years, you notice that most of us paint companies have a 2.5 or 3 inch binder in your library. And most of the stuff that you find in there with those data pages is a wealth of different products, from primers to finish coats to different sheen ranges and so on. There's a wealth of different paint products that are available in the marketplace, and level of quality is important. My personal opinion and kind of a guideline would be to use the best quality product that you can afford for your project. The quality of paint is really important in terms of longevity, square footage per gallon that you get out of the paint product, and for the overall durability factor of your paint projects. Cheap is not always the best thing to go by. And so most of us paint companies have a level of quality. For commercial projects, we have a level of quality. For multifamily, we have a level of quality. For residential, whenever you're getting into those residential products and so on, you're getting into premium grade paint products, and you're getting into those products that have a lot more of the additives to them and have the higher quality binders to them and so on. And those are great products to use if you're doing commercial work and building those into specifications. Just know that you're building a little bit more of a cost factor into those things on the cost per gallon that would be on your project too. And if maintenance is an issue, then certainly be talking to your paint professional about what you want to achieve or what your owner wants to achieve on the maintenance side of things, so that we can help you build a specification that will meet those goals.
Right. Well, we need to move on a little bit. So what kind of, that leads us, I think, into the next question. What are the set of attributes, the questions that we need to be asking of our paint reps, and decisions that we need to be making? And so here's a list, and as you've already pointed out, that most manufacturers make most of their products in good, better, and best lines, but it's rare that a manufacturer actually tells you which are which in its catalog.
Well, and that's a good point, Louis, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's important. Now, I know this is going to sound self-serving because I am one, But for you to get with a paint professional and a paint rep that you can trust and that you can ask questions of and get an opinion, and not just opinion about the paint products that they represent, but about the paint products that they sell against also, because most of us paint folks, we've been around for a period of time, we should know our competition probably as well as we know our own paint products, and should be able to discuss with you in a legitimate fashion the value of even competitive products. So having said that, I think it's really good to understand exactly, again, what you want to achieve in a paint specification. And the first place to start at is with the substrates, is to take a look at the overall substrates that you have on a project and be able to identify where you have a specific need. If it's a shower area or wet areas, that's going to be a whole separate category than interior drywall for an office. And we can help to adjust that specification or get the right systems in place so that you get long-term value for those kind of things.
On the appearance characteristics, Kent, how does gloss affect service life?
Well, that's a great question, Louis, because flat paint products do a great job in terms of hiding imperfections in the surface, but they're probably the least durable in terms of washability of all those. Now, as soon as I make that comment, I know there's some people sitting there thinking, yeah, but I know that there are some very good washable flats, and that's exactly right. There are some very good washable flats out there, especially if we go back to, I mentioned ceramic pigments. Those ceramic pigments that we have available in paint products can make a very scrubbable interior flat product. In most circumstances, though, just generically, when we think about flat paints, they're not going to wash as well as an eggshell, and an eggshell is not going to wash as well as a semi-gloss, and a semi-gloss is not going to wash as well as a gloss. So having said that, the durability factor from the washability factor, flat to gloss, you don't have as good a washability for flats as you do in a gloss. But in terms of appearance, you can mask a lot more with a flat product than you can with an eggshell, than you can with a semi-gloss. And a gloss is going to show most imperfections in a wall area. So having said that, again, it's one of those it depends things. What do you want to achieve on that particular substrate? Is washability, scrubbability important, or is aesthetics and appearance more important?
So, and one thing that we see pretty regularly is that we have folks that expect paints to actually fix substrates. So, and just realize it's a thin film product, and even though you can get a high build product, it's not going to fix a substrate. We end up with folks asking us to specify concrete block in an area where they know that they need to have high cleanability, and they expect the paint finish to be pinhole free. It's not going to happen.
Well, it can happen. It can happen. It may be a little bit more costly to get there, but pinhole free is achievable. There are block fillers and things of that nature that could you can actually pretty much surface a CMU wall if you wanted to. Now, having said that, is that
not at the cost that they want to pay?
There you go. So, which is more important, the end appearance or the cost factor to get the end appearance? So there again, these go hand in glove in a lot of situations.
I did a detention facility, a juvenile detention facility a few years ago, and we actually specified two coats of block filler rather than one, and then then went with an epoxy coating system over the top of it. And but Dave's quite right. You can't repair a bad surface with good paint.
No, but you can help specify surface preparation. And like with drywall, anything that's past an eggshell finish, we would normally recommend that you have a level 5 drywall finish as part of your specifications for the drywall. Because in essence, really what level 5 drywall finish is almost a skim coating the wall. Now, there are ways that we can do that with paint products too. We actually have high build primers that can be spray applied to those walls to give you a level 5 drywall finish too. So it doesn't have to be necessarily through the drywall contractor to achieve a level 5 drywall finish. But having said that, really what we're after is a relatively smooth appearance, that we don't have joint lines or nail heads popping up, that a gloss finish or anything that has a sheen to it could enhance. So having said that, that level 5 in your specification would be extremely helpful, and is normally our recommendation for you to have in your specifications anything that's above a flat finish.
We have a couple of questions about MPI, and we are going to cover that a little later in the presentation. But I think now, since we've been talking about the substrate a little bit, let's go ahead with the second poll question, Matt. And let's pick the brains of our friends here and see what their experience is with paint problems and failures.
You don't have enough choices, and I reviewed this. I mean, there are so many things that can go wrong.
Yes, but we have. But I think it's significant that there's a 0% voting for failure of the paint film itself. Well, there's 1%. Okay, so we have maybe 1 or 2 people. That is very rare. That even if you use a less well-known regional paint manufacturer, it may do very fine if you've got the right surface preparation, and if you keep water out of the wall behind it that wants to lift the paint off the surface.
Yeah, and water in the substrate may very well just play into surface prep as well. Make sure the surface is dry.
Absolutely. And it also says there's no point in painting a wall that you know is going to be periodically wet from above or from behind or whatever.
Well, and this is a great segue to talk about surface preparation. Obviously, our audience knows a lot about surface preparation, or knows about surface preparation being a key aspect of paint. And let me give you 3 words. If you want an easy and quick guide for surface preparation, keep these 3 words in mind: clean, dry, and dull. If we have a clean surface, a dry surface, and a dull surface, we have a very good opportunity to get paint to stick to it. If we don't have those 3 in place, then there is a good chance that we may have some paint failure along the way. So that is part of the entire thing. And I've mentioned the term systems here several times on this conversation today. And the reason I talk about systems is because it's not all about just the paint product. The paint product is part of that system, but we also have the applicator involved in that thing. We have the surface preparation involved in that situation. And then we have to have all 3 of those things to come together to really be able to have a good paint job. We have to have the appropriate paint products, we have to have the appropriate application, we have to have the appropriate surface preparation for all of that to come together to make for a good paint system. So keep that in mind. You can do a great job in terms of writing your specifications, but if we have any other field conditions that don't quite meet those needs in terms of getting the proper surface preparation or getting the proper application of that paint product to the surface, we may still be out there with you trying to figure out what exactly happened on your paint job. Not that anybody's ever been out there with their paint rep looking at a paint job or anything, nor am I wishing that upon you. But we know those things occur, and we're certainly there to try to back up the product after the application.
And we had a question from Melody Stinson asking how difficult
Melody.
to touch up epoxy paint. She says, I've been told by GC that they would have to repaint the entire wall to fix a small chipped area.
Well, and again, here comes my favorite phrase, it depends. It depends, A, where the chip is, and, you know, how, I guess, gloss products and epoxies tend to fall in that family. There's not a whole lot of flat epoxies out there. There tend to be more in the semi-gloss to gloss range. And so anytime you're touching up a semi-gloss or a gloss product, there is difficulty in doing that. And part of that has to do with film build. You're actually applying a whole nother coat of paint into that touch-up area, and as such you have more film build in that area than you do in the surrounding area. And you can have a difference in texture, or you can have a difference in sheen in that particular touch-up area. So I understand where they're coming from in terms of saying they need to recoat corner to corner. And again, in some circumstances, that may be a correct statement. I think there are a little bit more mitigating circumstances that need to be kind of ferreted out here before answering that question definitively. But it is a true statement that, I'm sorry?
Well, Kent, is there a difference between one-part epoxies and two-part epoxies in terms of touching up and repair?
Well, not so much the epoxy as much as it is the sheen range again. I think that's a kind of truism, whether it's an alkyd, whether it's an acrylic, whether it's an epoxy, is the touch-up would be somewhat indicative of the sheen range. I think an eggshell is going to touch up better than a semi-gloss is going to, and flats ought to touch up relatively well. But again, when we talk about touch-up, we need to talk about more than just one thing. It's not just the paint product, but it's also the application and the application tools. If they sprayed this epoxy wall and they're trying to come back in and touch it up with a paintbrush or with a roller, then they're going to have some trouble, because they're going to end up getting a texture difference in that area, and that texture difference is going to telegraph more so than the paint product itself being the issue. So it's important that whenever we're touching up that we use good touch-up technique, which could be a whole nother program in and of itself. But having said that, we normally like for the touch-ups to be done, we like to thin the product down and just basically go back in and touch up for color and try not to build up an entire whole nother sheen or whole nother coat of material over that area. And we also don't want it to be blocked out or geometrically applied so that you have a blocked area. I've seen situations on flat drywall where they've gone in and rolled it in geometrically. Actually walked in on a painting contractor one day, and he was sitting there and actually drawing geometric shapes on the wall doing the touch-up. And he was complaining about the touch-up of the material. Go think about that one for a minute. And as such, it was pretty obvious what the situation is. So touch-up is again, it could be a whole other subject in of itself, but just know that semi-glosses, glosses, higher sheen products do have more difficulty touching up than flatter finishes do.
Hey, Louis, I want to just remind, we have a good number of questions about MPI and paint specifications, and I know we have that later in the program, but we may want to try to get there sooner than later.
Okay, yeah, we're a little behind. We were going to talk a little bit about factors that affect performance. This is a photograph, and I don't know if you can see it, but there's a downspout that comes around, the snakes around the corner and dumps water directly on this concrete block wall, and surprise, surprise, the paint is peeling. And then here's a photo of what's on the other side of that wall, and you can see that this steel stair that behind the wall, some of the water is coming in from the door, but a lot of it is coming in through the wall and is rusting out the steel stair there, the rolled floor deck. So it's as I say, paint's supposed to protect things, but sometimes we have to protect the paint from outside influences. So we've talked about some of this stuff, about the factors that affect performance. So we've talked about paint quality and the substrate material, the moisture content, surface preparation. Obviously, if paint is exposed to the weather and the ultraviolet, it's a whole different thing than if it's interior. And we've talked about cleaning. So I really feel like we've probably given that a pretty good coverage. So let's go on. The MPI stuff, I wanted Kent to give us a little clue as to what's going on in the paint industry, and perhaps he could summarize some of these issues.
Yeah, there has been a lot of consolidation in the paint industry. I think you've all seen it one way or another. Maybe your favorite brand of paint has been acquired by another company. This consolidation has been going on for as long as I've been in the paint business, so these 36 years, and it continues to do so. You see some major brands out there, national brands that have acquired a lot of regional brands, and then you also see some regional brands these days that are kind of bonding together or getting together to create a regional group that is bigger than themselves individually. So you see multiple different things happening in the paint industry, but one of the things that is a constant and you'll continue to see is the fact that you will see brands beginning or continue to get acquired by other brands. That's just going to be part of life that we've known and will continue to know. So having said that, going into some of these other items on the list here too, zero VOC is an extremely important aspect. We see more of these products coming on the market these days. We have more availability to higher quality resins in that market space, and you will continue to kind of see that be the up and coming standard for the paint industry. We have zero VOC in a lot of circumstances.
Our firm does a lot of healthcare projects, and zero VOC is very important when you're redecorating an existing hospital that's already inhabited, because it reduces the smell and the discomfort to the patients may experience. Let's talk a little bit about the air drying fluoropolymer. So we can now have site-applied Kynar finishes. You know, one of the things we didn't talk about when we talk about binders is that some of the binders have to be thermoset. They have to, like baked enamel, and the typical Kynar or Hylar-based coating systems have to be thermoset. But why don't you give us a little introduction to this?
Well, yeah, and then thank you for that, Louis, because with fluoropolymers, yes, and this has been around for a while, these air-dried fluoropolymer systems, where you can actually get a field-applied, for lack of for a generic term, if you will, with actual brand name term is Kynar, but for those fluoropolymer resins that you have, or that you're used to having to have on formed metal and brought to your job site, we actually can recoat those with a fluoropolymer finish these days. We can go normally we put an epoxy primer or some kind of bonding primer on the surface and then come back with another coat of the air dry fluoropolymer over the surface, and can get you another 20 plus years of service life. So instead of you having to take that storefront and put it in a dumpster or take those metal panels off a building and increase the amount of trash that you're pulling off that building, you can actually recoat those surfaces and actually get a longer durability factor out of those. Those are available. You
can do that on aged metal roofing too.
Yeah, sure can. There's multiple different places we can put that. And but most of these fluoropolymers, not to say, we actually did paint drywall in one particular job with fluoropolymers. It was a color thing, and I'm still not exactly sure why we did that, but I'm aware of a particular circumstance in the DC area where that actually did occur. But having said that, that's not exactly where fluoropolymers are meant to go. They're mostly meant to go on metal surfaces, but sometimes they end up in street.
It's nice that we finally have the air drying fluoropolymers that are not through the roof in VOC, because that was the case just not all that long ago, and we couldn't even use them on the East Coast because of the VOC content.
No, and you raise a good point there, because one of the manufacturers of these resins has come out with a waterborne version of this that's beginning to gain popularity in the marketplace. And and again, that kind of goes along with waterborne systems as its general rule. And as we move more towards a zero VOC paint society, then you'll see more of these kind of products come to market. Now, another interesting product is polysiloxanes, and this is getting back to the question that we had originally. Let me speak to this a little bit, because polysiloxanes are, for lack of a better way of describing them, they're kind of an epoxy and urethane all in one. They have some benefits of epoxies, and they have some benefits of urethanes. So they have really good gloss and color retention and exterior exposure. But they will also, too, in some situations, you can use them as a base coat as well as a finish coat and get a 3-coat system out of 2 coats. They normally are high-volume solids, and as such, you can get that heavier film build to acquire a 3-coat, in 2 coats, excuse me, is what you would normally get in a 3-coat regular system. So these
for the building that we're in, my office is in, Kent and I, before the show, were looking out across the downtown area towards the Titans stadium, the football stadium, and they have begun repainting the framework for the field lighting with the polysiloxane paint from Kent's company, PPG Paints, and they're painting them very bright red. They're looking very, very good. So that's
this is a high performance new development
coating system. We need to move on.
Very good.
Okay. Polysiloxane may be something, maybe a variant of Dr. Siddiqui's, because he was saying his is a polyurethane and a combination of silicon and sulfides.
Yeah, so that very much could be that could be one of his patents, or at least one of his inventions. That's very interesting. I'd like to hear more about that.
Let's do the next poll question, which was actually requested by Ron Ray. And this is, how commonly are MPI methods of specifying paint used? And where the numbers are coming in. Okay. Apparently we still have a strong preference for listing proprietary products when we can find ones that are truly comparable. It does make it easier to check the submittals when they come in that way. And
it's actually heartening, don't you think, Louis, that we have specifiers, architects, and other folks out there that are taking the time to understand the paint systems well enough that they are specifying it by product.
But you're certainly not hurting this paint guy's feelings seeing those numbers up there. I like the fact that people are still using proprietary systems, and it's understandable why MPI has gained a good foothold. I mean, with the CAN spec systems that are using MPI for the 09900 section, it's understandable why they're being used as much as they are. Now, having said that, there's some good things about MPI, and there's not some good things about MPI. So,
one of the things that attracts people at least to the concept, is that there are no ASTM standards or true industry standards. Like if I specify premium grade woodwork, architectural woodwork for the judge's bench in a courtroom that meet AWI standards, I know pretty much exactly what I'm going to get. Same thing if I specify grade 1 hardware, I know it's been tested that it'll work 1,000,000 times without failure. So that's, that was the hope, but the question is, does the MPI really provide that for us, or is it not?
Okay, so Matt, you want to go back to the program, and then we can get on more with the MPI discussion.
Try to wrap this up.
Well, and in looking at the advantages with standardized terminology, that is a part of it. Independent evaluation and the web-based software to select the systems and level playing field with respect to Sheen provides environment info with VOC levels. The only issue is that with a lot of MPI categories, you will see multiple products from manufacturers in those categories. And so you can't just take that category at face value and say that all the products in that category are of equal value. Because what ends up happening is us paint manufacturers, we end up putting higher quality materials in there, as well as, in some circumstances, products that are built specifically to meet that MPI category. And as such, you end up having products in there that are not equal to each other, and along with that equality aspect of it is the price differences between those. So in essence, if you don't do something to make a standard of quality out of an MPI category, you're going to get the least expensive product that the painting contractor can get in that category as your standard of quality. And if that's what you want to establish, then that's fine, but just know that whenever you don't do some editing to the MPI standards, and whenever you don't pull out proprietary products or equal products from manufacturers that you consider equal in that category, that you're going to end up getting the least expensive product out of that category. Does that make sense, Louis?
Absolutely.
David?
One thing, Kent, and that's why I had suggested we put in the option to specify MPI with the proprietary, because if we're going to list MPI standards, listing a proprietary, at least a brand name, would get you an expected quality level, as opposed to leaving it wide open to whatever product will meet MPI.
We also might mention, for those who like to specify by the proprietary method, that the Chicago chapter of CSI, their technical committee got together and listed proprietary products by paint system, the most common paint systems, and have published that to make it available to all of their members. And I believe a couple of other chapters around the country have done that. Certainly individual specifiers have done that. So that is an alternative to, or a supplement to, the MPI system. But I was surprised when Kent helped me establish my list of proprietary products for specifying that there were a number of very common systems that were not even covered in MPI. The things that we use all the time, but they weren't even listed.
Well, and along with that too, Louis, one of the other limitations of MPI is the fact that not all categories does all paint manufacturers put a product in. In essence, I mean, like with white shellac, there's probably 2 or 3 products listed in that category, and that's because most of those paint manufacturers are going to probably go to somebody else's product for those particular categories. But just know too that if you're doing a MPI specification and you want to absolutely have an MPI number attached to things, that not all paint manufacturers, and probably not all paint manufacturers as a general rule, have all categories filled. We've all gone towards more of the common categories and have products lined up there, but you're not going to see probably anybody that's got every category filled with a paint product. And MPI continues to, I'm sorry?
We have a couple of questions we need to get caught up on.
Yes.
We had a couple of inquiries about getting a copy of that paint list from the Chicago chapter, and I got one from one of our regular listeners, volunteered to send it to David and me in preparation or before this session, and I'm sure that they would be happy to send you a PDF or a Word file of that if you contact the CSI technical, the Chicago chapter technical committee of the chapter. I'm sorry. So, and then Charisse asked, do paint manufacturers pay to be listed in MPI? Yeah.
Oh yes, yep. That is it. It's a cost factor for us, and it's also a limitation too. I think we have 3 years. It's a limitation, 3 to 5 years that we're listed before we have to go reapply and pay our fees all over again to maintain our listing. So there is a monetary factor involved there, no doubt. So that's kind of an ongoing aspect.
And that may be selecting or preventing some of the regional companies, the smaller paint manufacturers, from participating.
Yeah, possibly. That really can be, because if you take a look at all the NPI categories, and I haven't counted them up lately, but it's in the hundreds, and you think in terms of the cost factor for each category, it can be a very significant investment to be listed in NPI.
But it does give a certain level of objective evaluation.
Yes, it does. And if you're doing government work, if you're using federal government work, you're going to be using NPI whether you want to or not, because that's the standard that they want to work off of. And we could talk about NPI all day. That could be, again, and we've only just kind of scratched the surface on paint as a general rule. But NPI, we could talk about it for an extended period of time and still not probably cover all the topics that everyone out there would like to talk about.
Well, we're right up on the hour, and so I hope all of the audience will give our guest presenter a hearty round of applause. Oh, yes, yes. I can hear it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I can hear it all the way to Nashville. Thank you.
Here's a picture of Kent helping me deal with some peeling paint on a project that we built a few years ago. And he's very helpful. So thank you all for your kind attention. We have not selected a subject for December yet, but keep those.
I'm sure we'll come up with something.
Yeah, keep the cards and letters coming in, friends and neighbors.
Right.
We, as we say every month, this is your program, and we want to cover the subjects that you find interesting. So thank you again, Kent, for coming over to the office and
it has been a pleasure
sharing your knowledge with us. It's very impressive. And we
we'll
look forward
see
to
everybody
talking to you
here.
next month.
Yeah, December 3rd, first Thursday.
Early. Okay. Well,
yes, very early.
You're going to have to get on the stick, David, and come up with a topic.
I suppose I will. Or I can punt to you.
No,
okay,
you said
thank you all for joining.
All right. Well, thank you again. As a reminder to everybody, today's session was recorded and will be made available on the YouTube channel along with last month's session once the terms and conditions issue with YouTube has been resolved, probably within the next day or so. Thank you again. You may now disconnect. And as David said, see you here December 3rd.